Welcome to the Connected Enterprise Podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision33, and my guest today is Ray Van Hilst from Yoko Co. It takes you a while to get that one out, but Ray, welcome to the podcast. Start us off by telling us about yourself and Yoko Co.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Thank you so much for having me on today. So Yoko CO or Yoko Co, we are a digital marketing agency. We work exclusively with organizations. They're making an impact in the world and have a motive beyond profit. So we work with nonprofits, associations, but also for-profit companies that are doing game-changing technology or game-changing work, and just basically that are motivated to say, hey, what we're doing makes this world a better place. We fundamentally believe that an organization's website is their biggest lever for making a positive impact. So we help them maximize their web presence so that they can be more successful. As far as my role at the company, I'm Director of Client Results. I help our clients, as I say, get beyond the, hey, wouldn't it be great if, and actually figure out a plan and look at content strategy of that.
That's really good. You know, I read that on your website about, it was many years ago. It seems like over a decade where the company kind of made this decision to work with that kind of a business and only work with that kind of a business. Can you give me a little background on why that was, why that decision was made?
Yeah, so Chris Yoko, the CEO, which by the way, today is our 12th birthday. We are officially tweens now. As a company, so Chris and the team were looking at the clients that they were working with and said, what kind of work really energizes us and what are we feeling excited about? Nothing against people that want to just build widgets to sell, like sites to sell a widget or whatever, but at the end of the day, how fulfilling is that of what you're doing with your work? And then they also took a look at the clients that go all in and care as much about the work as we do. And what we found, and what I found out in my career, because I'm very like-minded, is that the clients that are into this for a reason, because they see the end benefit of this, are the ones that really are as passionate about the work and give their best and put that all in as we take a look at that. So it's, as a matter of fact, we actually have in our kickoff decks, one of our rules of engagement is play all out or leave. And so we want to make sure that, we care passionately about our work and we care passionately about helping our clients do better in the world. And that's why it is. So it was an opportunity to basically reassess the book of work, figure out what brings joy, since this is, work at something we do for 8 to 10 hours a day. Let's make sure we're enjoying it and feeling positive at the end of the day after doing it.
I saw that and it appealed to me because part of my background, I worked in 2 not-for-profits. One was a kind of a religious not-for-profit and the other was a medical relief agency. And so that appealed to me. And what I thought would be fun to talk about with you is, these types of agencies, obviously, many of them have probably, in terms of the services and the value that they deliver, have had to sort of change the way they do things or modify over the last year and a half, but maybe a little differently than just a straight distribution company. So what kinds of things have really, the collective of your customers, really cared about differently over the last, year and a half or so?
It's a great question, because one of the things that happened, first when the pandemic kicked in was this sense of panic and collapse, and everything contracted and people stopped spending, and particularly nonprofits who rightfully should be spending their money on their outcomes and helping people rather than on like marketing projects with us. And we totally get that. But then what happened was people started realizing, hey, this is not a short-term thing. We're going to have to adjust. And we've heard in the business world the great pivot and how everything has changed. One of the things that we started seeing was the organizations that had the most nimble technology and the most nimble mindset were the ones that were able to pivot and respond quicker. And if they were willing to experiment and try different things, they were able to get ahead of that curve and start regaining what was happening. A specific trend that we saw, for example, in associations that do continuing education, since everyone was all of a sudden at home, we saw across all of our client sites, traffic may have gone down, but traffic into the continuing education content, that went up. So that conversion into the organizations for people saying, hey, I still have to get my continuing education for my job. And maybe I'm not at work, but I can do this while I'm at home. And now it's a lot more convenient for me because I don't have to go to a conference for 4 days. I can do it on my own schedule. So that's an example of basically responding to those needs as things were changing within there, and using your content to do that.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. When I was in not-for-profit, one of the things that happened is, like you said, when, let's say, there was an economic downturn, right, or something, we found that our competitor not-for-profit organizations were always competing for the dollars, right, for the donation dollars, to continue to do what we were doing. They would sort of, shrink their programs and, not have as many fundraising events and things like that. And I was in charge of fundraising. I came up with this unique concept that downturns are opportunity to step up, right? And that seems to be what you're talking about. So we found actually that when the economy sort of would draw down, if with the right mindset, we could actually grow during that period of time if we took advantage of the situation and did more than what we were doing previously.
Yeah, well, and the other thing within that we saw within our clients, it was an opportunity to stop doing some things, and some special along the way, when things are good, special projects come up and like, hey, let's start doing this. And all of a sudden, as things get tighter, it's like, okay, should we have been doing this? Is the right thing to do?
Yeah, maybe it's not our core mission, right? To be involved with that. For sure. That's interesting. What type of things did people change about their, you made the comment that their website is probably their number one tool for getting their message out and doing what they do. It really is, in today's world, extremely important for not-for-profit organizations. What sort of things did they change about their websites as quickly as they could to adapt to what happened when COVID hit us all?
Specifically, there were a few areas in terms of looking at identifying immediate content for information. So how can you react? Like, for example, one of our clients is the American Association of Endodontists. People still needed root canals. Okay. And as things started opening up, but there was a lot of concern about what should I, can I go, is it safe to go to the dentist? Is it safe to go get a root canal? And now that things have settled down. So there was this period of, what do we do? But now it's positioned into both for the members of AAE, but the AAE also has a patient site of here's what you need to know. So it's just really, and this goes back to content strategy 101 of address what people are worried about or most concerned about and make that content front and center. And we actually, on the AAE site, they did a really good job of pulling that content, that since that was priority content as people were getting back to used to doing things, that became the lead content on the website. And then after a few months, we were able to prioritize it and reprioritize the Find an Endodontist tool. And we saw some really good observations. The other thing that we saw is, quite frankly, around an issue is people stepping up their search engine optimization game. Search traffic jumped as people were doing more things. So looking at, does your site have the content to address these questions that people have? And if not, then creating content to add it and adding in a user journey to convert off of that.
Yeah, I've heard some reports that said, that internet traffic has increased dramatically over the last year. And how did that play into, what people would see they needed to do?
So a couple trends that we saw is, first of all, across the whole, traffic in client sites dropped a little bit throughout the pandemic as gross numbers, but engagement went up. And this is actually across all of our sites, for-profit, nonprofit, association, et cetera. That was across the board. So really what we saw was, as I say, the tire kickers weren't coming through as much, but the people that were coming in were more focused and they were looking at more pages. And the sites with all the sites we managed, the ones that had defined user journeys saw more conversions going up and saw those opportunities to engage. The other trend that we saw is the importance of search engine optimization, because we've seen traffic go up via organic search. Particularly, in the midst of this pandemic, we're at least 2 major Google search engine algorithm updates that will change things. So if you're being helpful in your content, if you're doing things right, you're always going to win in this game. I was literally just having this conversation with a client. or with a colleague, that you can't keep up with Google's algorithm changes. That's a game of whack-a-mole. But what you can do is have authentic, helpful content that speaks to your users and your audiences, that helps them succeed. Google is always going to reward that content, and you'll see your traffic start to go up off of that.
Let's talk about content for a minute. I find that, even in my own organization, that we work really hard at sort of constantly having new content, because it seems like no matter how good the content you have is or how relevant it is, the algorithms are always looking for new stuff. And that there's a premium paid for that. How big a challenge is it for the organizations you work with to constantly be sort of, answering the same question, but in a new way, with new content?
So I think the first thing that organizations struggle with to go along with that is saying, what are those questions that they should be answering? And what content should we be creating? And making sure that it aligns with the strategy. And that's actually where I see organizations. And I was talking with a client that has a fabulous blog program. They're creating all this content. And I said to them, well, where does this content get from? And the CEO is like, oh, it comes from an idea that I have. And I just write it. And I was like, okay, but have you stopped and asked, is this an idea there's a place for that, but is this content that's related to something your users are trying to solve or interested in? Because that ultimately, that's not going to help your SEO as you take a look at that. So I think that's the first thing is, and I say this all the time, when someone comes to your website, they don't care about you. They're not coming to learn about you. They're coming to your website because they have a problem or an issue to solve. And it's our job as marketers to say, hey, here's the challenge you have. Let me help you solve that and provide some information for you along that way. So that's how you can keep that pipeline fresh as you're going through the information. Your other opportunity, though, is like you may have some evergreen content. For example, like a landing page about a subject on your site. Google's okay if you update it. Go ahead and go back and add information in, make it more relevant, resubmit it to Google, make those tweaks and make it relevant to people. So that way you can look at that as like your pillar page, your home base for a core concept, and then have your other pages around that support it as you take a look at it. Maybe those are blog posts that I'll link back in.
I think, you kind of touched on something there because you brought up a memory for me. I used to work for a CEO, and we were kind of a small consulting firm at the time. And he would read a book on the weekend. And then at our all hands meeting that happened every Monday morning at 8:00, he didn't ever have an agenda. He was just telling us about the book he read. And so it's kind of like, okay, where are we going with this, right?
Yeah.
And because there was no sort of theme to it. It was different topics kind of all over the place. And I can see how that's easy for a CEO to do, because many of them are extremely well read, right? And they've got a lot on their minds, and they like to talk about it and to share it. But I think doing it very strategically in terms of, what are people looking for us to answer for them would be much more important. And I think the challenge there is being able to do it in a new and a fresh way, right?
In a fresh way, yeah. And don't get me wrong, there's a place for that thought leadership and pushing what you do forward and being ahead of that. In my opinion, that should be maybe 30% of your content, 40% of your content, because you still have to cover the base. You can write the best book in the world, and if no one ever buys it, it's not going to make it a New York Times bestseller or change the world.
Right.
So
companies typically, they sort of know what they do, and they know what they believe. But it seems to me like many of them struggle to sort of find out what our customers want us to talk to them about, right?
Yes.
They can totally be on a different page, and that'll lead the content on their website to really be sort of not totally relevant to their customers and their prospects.
Well, it's classic. If you go into most like SaaS companies, which we work with a bunch, and you ask them of what kind of content you should have, the salespeople are going to pipe up with all their ideas of what they've heard and stuff like that. Because we're sales, we talk to the customers. Customer support's going to have their whole issues. They're going to tell this, and marketing's going to say, but this is our branding message that's going in with that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think it's difficult to really sort of answer the question that the customer is asking, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we get bogged down by, well, this is what I want the customer to hear.
Right.
Rather than let me answer your question. That's because I think you've mentioned it. It seems like, when they're trying to get that question answered, and the only reason they're on your site is because the search engine told them these guys might have an answer. Right. So they don't even know you yet, right? If they're in the prospecting stage, just looking and trying to find some place that has the best information is a challenge to make sure it's relevant to the person that it's supposed to be relevant to. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so there's two things that go along with that. One is you got to get outside your building and go talk to customers with an open mind and be ready to hear things you may not want to hear. That is really key. And don't just talk to the customers that you always hear from. There's the frequent flyers that and your customers that maybe, give you most of your revenue and so on and so forth. Dig deeper and talk to people that are maybe a casual buyer or, an infrequent user. Take a few minutes and just chat with them and ask them about their journey of what they came in and what they're looking for along that. The next piece as you take a look at that is to map your content towards their understanding of what it is you do. Now, we use a methodology, we call it a conversation spectrum of how someone goes through their content. We map it on the stages of oblivious, curious, intrigued, invested, and converted. It's just a variation of the awareness, knowledge, liking, preference we all learned back in college. Yeah. But, to the person that I just have a problem to solve. Like you said, they don't even know you exist. They just Googled and said, your site might have this answer. And then they discover the answer. They're like, oh, there's an answer to this. And, oh, you solved this problem for me, going through that. Now, that's a way that you can manage that conversation and not overwhelm someone through your website journey around that information.
Yeah, because, the search engine just takes you to the landing page. Right? It's not quote, our page, it's our landing page. And so they've bypassed all of the who you are, what you do, how you do it, just zip right around. And so you're trying to build a relationship by providing value.
And I'll tell you the sad part, that landing page that they came in on is a landing page that someone put up in a hurry and no one thought about. Because when you stop and think about the website design process, we'll have 5 meetings about the homepage and move everything out and get the images great. It's like, okay, we're good, move on. Let's go build the other 400 pages. And we never stop and think about what's the first thing someone sees, what's the call to action, what's the next step. Does this page look as good and does it work as hard as the homepage?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it, that these sort of landing pages need to be refreshed from time to time. Seems like, our organization, I think we do a good job with marketing, but our growth sort of makes me think that. But our sales guys would tell you that it's them, of course, 100%. But I think our marketing department does a really good job and in assisting with that endeavor. And the website, it seems like we sort of remake ourselves every 2 or 3 years to a large degree. And I wouldn't say that the data is significantly different that's there to be found, or the information, but it's refreshed. It has a different look. It's organized in a different way. We sort of get better, I think, with time in terms of how we organize things.
Well, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that the in an area that you're hitting on, you said refreshing every 2 to 3 years, taking a look at that. I think that's a hard part that the marketers, and particularly in budgeting for the marketing cycle on the website, need to be aware of, is that it's no longer a build it and set it, set a thing. It's your website needs constant investment. And we advise our clients, okay, once you're done with the first project, like, go ahead and budget 20 to 30% of your spend on the first build, for ongoing improvements and things within the website to keep that going. And I'm not even just talking about maintenance and hosting, just let's add features, let's put that in, we do a program with our clients where we say, okay, which I think most people should do, define your KPIs, test, improve, repeat, keep making those modifications over time as you do that. Financially, so a lot of orgs say, okay, we're gonna spend a crap ton of money on the website. We're gonna amortize this over 5 years and not spend any more money. And then 5 years later, you wake up and you're like, oh man, it's a piece of shit. This doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And, if you would have spread that cost out, it's 5 years later, it would still be a good looking website and still meeting your goals.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's a lot of smaller organizations sort of, I would, based on my experience, sort of struggle to put money in that marketing budget because it's sort of, the outcomes can be nebulous at times, right? Especially if you don't have really good tracking mechanisms to see what you get for that investment. And many companies don't, right? It's just they sort of see it it goes in, it comes out. But how do they do a better job of recognizing the value of the investments they make into marketing per se?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the things, like I said, define your goals and your KPIs. What is it we're looking to do, and how do we define the success? We do this in our kickoff meetings. We say, okay, let's talk about qualifiable success. What's it look like at launch and 6 months later? And let's talk about quantifiable success. Yep. What's it look like at a year and a half? Is it more leads? Is it more donations? Is it more, we've done sites for 2 animal welfare groups. Is it more adoptions? Those are those kinds of things you can take a look at. And then you can quantify that. And I think the challenge is your teams are busy, and organizations don't always, particularly in nonprofits, they don't necessarily put someone in charge of the website. Yeah. Website needs to have an owner, needs to have a managing, within your organization, there needs to be a managing editor. And that's for profits as well. There needs to be a content strategy, there needs to be a governance strategy that says, Jane is the managing editor and she's going to decide this is our content cadence, this is our roles, so on and so forth. And that's our primary role. She may have other things, but a lot of organizations say, okay, marketing director, you're in charge of my user conference and my email campaigns and social, and by the way, you get the website. Yeah. Right. Put someone in charge and include analytics as part of that. And go back and ask your vendor. If your web vendors aren't offering up analytics support, and that's one of the things that we offer is analytics support to our clients, because we're looking at things, at trends across all these sites that we manage and build and host. We're able to offer some insight of like, this is looking good, you're fine here, but that, improve there as you take a look at that.
Yeah. We are a nation of small businesses, and we probably as a country have more not-for-profit, type of companies than anywhere else in the world. Now that we've gone through this sort of year and a half, whatever it's looking like it's going to be, Ray, do you think there's any like big lessons that are to be learned out of that will help us going forward? Yeah.
So I think one, embrace the concept of digital first. I know we've been talking about this for a long time, but it's, embrace the understanding that your digital strategy can lead the way to get your message out, to engage audiences of doing that. And I see it, friends of mine that have built small businesses and done things, and the first thing they do is have a strong digital strategy. And that, even a friend of mine owns a coffee shop here in Northern Virginia. And the first thing he did, he came to me when we were starting, he said, I need a website. I said, you haven't even started roasting coffee. He said, I know, I need a website first. And he got it. He now has 3 locations and his business has grown and he's doing awesome. But that kind of attitude. I think the other thing is, don't get stuck on shiny objects. The shiny object syndrome is still a real thing. And when you go out and you look in the marketplace of tools that you may need, you can look at we happen to work in WordPress. That's what it works for us. You may go look at a larger system. If you're a company like, oh yeah, I'm going to need Sitecore, I'm going to buy HubSpot and all these kinds of things. It's okay to start small. It's okay to start with, and I've helped friends and people get set up on Squarespace and Weebly. It works. Get your training wheels on the tools you can use, and then grow into the next thing. I know we were talking about road bikes before we came on the air. It's like, you don't have to go out and buy a $12,000 carbon fiber bike if you're just learning how to ride a bike. Right. To go ahead, start off as you're going.
Yeah, I started off on Yamaha 125s, right? Yeah. I think it was a Suzuki 185, and then I went back to a Yamaha 450, and that one hurt me. Same principle. Yeah.
So I think it's the same thing, and is natural. This actually, I was reading a study where it's talking about how people overbuy in their marketing technology. They aspire to that, but they don't necessarily have the bandwidth for it. The good thing is nowadays, most of these tools you can easily migrate. And I try not to go in, I try not to encourage clients to go all in on one particular tech stack, because then if you have to move, it just creates that much more work for you.
Right.
But yeah, look at ways that you can plug and play and grow in different places within your marketing technology stack around that.
Well, Ray, so that's all about business. What's it been like for you personally over the last year? I mean, what changed for you?
Well, our company was already remote. Yeah, so when everyone all of a sudden went home on, I think it was March 13th, 2020, we still woke up and came to our offices. So there's that part. For me personally, my wife is a teacher, and she teaches second grade in Vienna, Virginia. I got to hear her teach. And I think that was actually, we got to spend more time at home together, and listening to her teach and engage with her kids was definitely the highlight. And I'm gonna brag on her for a bit. I tell her all the time that listening to my wife teach is like watching Tom Brady play football. She's just, it's what she was born to do, and she's really talented at it. So that part has been good. I think professionally, and I know people in agencies, in this industry, we are people pleasers, and we care. And then the fact our clients are struggling, we all, and every person I talk to in an agency, we all put in the extra hours over the past year.
Yeah.
And we all said, how can we help our clients through this? How can we take it on? We can't, how do we help you stay afloat? How do you do that? There's a really good podcast I listened to called the Build a Better Agency Podcast. And they were talking about this. And we realized we have to be kind to ourselves. Yeah. Be there for our clients, but look out, because we can't burn out, because we're helping our clients.
Yeah.
I have to make sure we do that.
Well, that's a good word. And I think for all the teachers, I know a lot of people have been dissatisfied with their children, being in remote situations, but I can't imagine what it's been like for teachers to go from in class to remote, and that they've got to be just as anxious as everybody to get back to the good old days, right?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. She just got actually this week, she just had all of her students back in class for the first time.
That's great. That's great. So, my grandson's a room behind me here, and he's struggling, to get through this year of remote learning. And there's just some things that, he's anxious to get back to the real world. So that's going to happen soon for sure. Well, Ray, thank you for joining us today. Good words, and always great to speak with someone who works with not-for-profits and, helps them to do so well what they do. There's a lot of people that count on them in our country and across the world. And so congratulations on that special mission that Yoko has.
Thank you so much.
It's admirable. It's admirable, and it's great to hear about. So thank you, Ray. We'll look forward to maybe staying in touch with you.
Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome. And to all the rest of you, until we see you again, stay connected.